6 medieval kings people believed never truly died. Bodies boiled and steeped in vinegar, severed heads sealed tight in jars of honey, or corpses trampled to dust beneath the hooves of warhorses. Yet, bizarrely enough, the entirety of medieval Europe bowed down and blindly believed. These kings were still very much alive. For centuries, this collective mass delusion ignited some of the most brutal and bloody civil wars. Thousands of fanatics willingly followed peasant imposters, only to suffer horrifying corporal punishments like being drawn and quartered or hanged by dog chains. Why was an old continent, rife with political intrigue, so easily led by the nose by dismembered corpses? Behind the eternal slumber atop snow-capped peaks or deep within volcanoes, there was absolutely no magic. In the next few minutes, we will tear open the true death files of the 6 most powerful monarchs of Europe. Watch until the end of the video, and you will grasp exactly how the medieval ruling class forged the immortal king as an instrument for brainwashing and perfectly manipulating the psychology of the masses. If you are tired of sugar-coated history and ready to face the rawest, darkest truths, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Unfiltered History begins. Number 1. Frederick I Barbarossa, the information void and the psychological need of an entire nation. In 1187, the news that Jerusalem had fallen to Saladin's Islamic forces sent shockwaves through Europe like an earthquake. Amidst this backdrop, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I, famously known as Barbarossa, decided to personally lead the Third Crusade. At that time, Barbarossa was not just a king, he was the ultimate symbol of Western military might, a notorious tyrant who ruled with an iron fist to crush any resistance. Recall the events of 1162, when the city of Milan dared to challenge his authority. Barbarossa didn't just defeat them, he wanted to wipe them off the mental map of Europe. He ordered the expulsion of the entire population, leveled their architecture, and had his soldiers plow the very earth so that no living thing could ever take root again. Under the boots of this tyrant, the Holy Roman Empire experienced its absolute zenith, but one paved with bloody suppression. With such commanding prestige, people expected Barbarossa to crush Saladin and bring glory back to the Christian world. However, history has a cruel way of mocking human ambition. In June 1190, Barbarossa's massive army reached the Salif River. Under the scorching heat of the Middle Eastern summer, the 68-year-old monarch decided to wade across the river to save time. According to the historians marching with the army, the swift currents, combined with the sheer weight of his armor, dragged the most powerful emperor in Europe down to the bottom. There was no epic showdown with Saladin, no glorious arrow piercing his chest. The man who once made all of Europe tremble, drowned pointlessly in a shallow river in a foreign land. This sudden death threw the Crusader army into absolute panic. But the true nightmare had only just begun, processing the body. In the medieval mindset, the flesh of a sovereign was sacred. It had to be brought back to his homeland for burial to await Judgment Day. But how do you preserve a corpse under the blazing heat of Asia Minor on a journey spanning thousands of miles? Barbarossa's soldiers were forced to resort to a gruesome practice known as mos teutonicus. At the camp, they erected massive cauldrons of boiling water. The great emperor's body was dismembered and violently boiled for hours until the flesh completely separated from the bone. The white bones were kept to be taken to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the decomposing flesh and internal organs were stuffed into a large wooden barrel, flooded with sour vinegar and wine to stall the rotting process. This entire procedure created a scene of pure horror, casting an overwhelming, putrid stench across the encampment. Traumatized by the desecration and demoralized by the loss of their commander, thousands of German soldiers fell ill, went mad, or quietly deserted into the night. The once proud army disintegrated. The weary few who remained carried the vinegar barrel of the king's flesh to Antioch for burial, while the bones were sent to Tyre. The epic saga ended with a tragic full stop. Not a single piece of Barbarossa's remains ever made it back to Germany. The absence of an intact corpse, coupled with a distinctly unheroic death, created a massive informational black hole when the news reached his homeland. Germany instantly spiraled into a vortex of fractured power. Amidst the dark ages of inflation and riots, societal despair bred a collective psychological defense mechanism. They flat-out rejected reality. According to records from the Royal Chronicle of Cologne, the people vehemently refused to mourn. Whispers began to ignite, spreading from slum taverns to opulent castles. They passed around the rumor that Redbeard wasn't dead. He was merely hiding in a deep cave beneath the Kyffhäuser Mountains. Legend had it that the king was sleeping at a stone table, his beard growing endlessly right through the stone. When the black ravens stopped circling the mountain peak, he would awaken, draw his sword to restore order, and lead Germany back to its golden age. This psychological manipulation did not manifest out of thin air. A slew of forged documents known as the Sibylline Oracles were widely distributed by monks and scholars. They exploited this blind faith to maintain social order and pacify the exploited classes. The myth of the king sleeping in the mountain wasn't proof of loyalty. It was a damning indictment of a medieval society rotting from the inside out, where people would rather cling to a delusional dream about a vinegar-soaked corpse than face and fix their own grim reality. Number 2. Frederick II, the legacy of extreme cultism. If Barbarossa was deified due to a bodiless death, his grandson, Emperor Frederick II, warped the minds of Europe through the sheer paranoia and cruelty he exhibited while alive. Ruling the Holy Roman Empire until 1250, Frederick II was hailed by the intellectuals of his time as Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. But through the lens of mob psychology, he was a masterful manipulator. He cloaked himself in an enigmatic aura, a blend between an enlightened sage and an apocalyptic demon. His reign was submerged in macabre human experiments that pushed the boundaries of morality. The monk Salimbene di Adam recorded an event that exposed this cold-blooded nature, the language deprivation experiment. Seeking to discover the original language of humanity, wanting to know if infants, left untaught, would naturally speak Hebrew, Greek, or Latin, Frederick ordered a group of newborns to be isolated. The decree was unimaginably cruel. Wet nurses were strictly forbidden from speaking, singing lullabies, or cuddling them. They were only to feed and bathe the infants in absolute silence. The result? Deprived of human interaction and affection, every single one of those children died a miserable death in suffocating silence. Yet, a tyrant who treated human life like garbage met a remarkably mundane end. In 1250, Frederick II passed away. He didn't die in battle. He wasn't assassinated by poison. He died of dysentery. A messy, wretched death in a sickbed caused by an intestinal infection. And that was the cognitive shock the masses refused to process. The fanatical cults simply could not accept that a figure grand enough to manipulate a continent could slip out of this world as easily as a common peasant. Dissatisfaction with reality triggered a self-brainwashing mechanism. They spread the word. The emperor is not dead. He is merely in a deep slumber beneath the lava of Mount Etna in Sicily, awaiting his return to judge the world. This extreme cultism left a disastrous legacy. It allowed pure deceit to ascend the throne. The climax arrived in 1284, exactly 34 years after the king's death, when a fraudster named Tile Kolop appeared in Germany. He boldly proclaimed himself to be the returning Emperor Frederick II. He was so audacious that he set up his own royal court in the city of Wetzlar, donned imperial robes, and forged royal seals to issue decrees and collect taxes. The chilling part wasn't Tile Kolop's recklessness. It was the fact that thousands of peasants, monks, and even local nobles genuinely bowed down, swore allegiance, and paid taxes to him. Why were they so easily led by an impostor? The core insight here is societal Stockholm Syndrome. Having been domesticated for decades by brutal rule, medieval people craved the familiar shadow of a tyrant. They would rather submit to a fake dictator who promised strength than face the empty, leaderless chaos of the times. This political farce only ended when King Rudolf I personally marched his army to crush the rebellion, tying Tile Kolop to a stake and burning him alive to ashes for heresy. The impostor was dead, but the embers of that fanaticism and the desperate craving to be ruled by ruthlessness continued to haunt Europe for centuries. Number 3. Baldwin IX, Manipulative Tactics and Political Smokescreens. Moving from the Stockholm Syndrome of the subjugated, we enter the 13th century, where delusion didn't just happen naturally, it was weaponized as a tool for profit. At the center of this theatrical play was Baldwin IX, Count of Flanders and the Latin Emperor of Constantinople. At his core, Baldwin was no religious martyr. He was the embodiment of bottomless greed. As a leader of the Fourth Crusade, instead of marching to Jerusalem, Baldwin callously redirected his forces to slaughter, rape, and plunder his own Orthodox Christian brothers in Constantinople just to hoard gold and silver. But historical karma often strikes fast. Just a year later, in 1205, during the brutal Battle of Adrianople against the Bulgarian army, Baldwin completely vaporized. No corpse was ever found. Not a single piece of royal armor was identified on the killing fields. This clean disappearance accidentally tossed Europe the most devastating psychological time bomb. No body means he isn't dead. Over 20 years later, that bomb detonated. By then, his homeland of Flanders had plunged into an agonizing deadlock. Countess Joan had imposed crushing taxes, bleeding the peasantry dry. The poverty and the corruption of the ruling class had pushed society to the edge of the abyss. Right at that moment, a ragged hermit suddenly emerged from the deep woods, loudly declaring that he was the true Baldwin IX, returned to save his people. This peasant, named Bertrand, was no madman. He was a cunning old fox in the art of manipulation. According to the chronicler Philippe Mousquet, Bertrand intentionally inflicted a deep scar down his face, perfectly matching a known old battle wound of King Baldwin. He quietly bribed disgruntled courtiers to memorize palace secrets, rambling on endlessly about private conversations that only the real king should have known. When a community is pushed to the brink of starvation, they no longer care about the truth. Desperation breeds willful blindness. The mob would rather crown a beggar with a fake scar, as long as he dared to rise up against the current oppressive regime, than continue enduring their grim reality. Bertrand's charade was so flawless that it manipulated high-level geopolitics. Even King Henry III of England, wanting to use this king against France, pretended to buy into it completely and sent a letter proposing a military alliance. Europe was shaken. All of Flanders was engulfed in a revolutionary riot. But cruel reality has no room for fairy tales. When the military alliance collapsed, Bertrand was captured. Countess Joan didn't just want to kill him. She wanted to kill the public's ideology of resistance. The medieval justice system handed down a verdict of ultimate humiliation. Bertrand was stripped naked and tied to a cart, paraded through slums overflowing with feces and garbage. Finally, he was hanged in the city of Lille, not by a human rope, but by a dog chain. That filthy chain crushed the impostor's throat, simultaneously suffocating any remaining illusions of salvation among the destitute class. Number 4. Edward II, the blackmail smokescreen behind the British crown. If Baldwin IX vanished in battle, the story of King Edward II of England opens up a far darker corner: systemic deceit right in the heart of the royal family. In the early 14th century, Edward II's reign was considered exceptionally corrupt. The king was a weak ruler who only knew how to extort wealth from the peasants to pamper his greedy favorites. Public resentment peaked when his own queen, Isabella, alongside her lover Mortimer, staged a coup, deposed Edward II in 1327, and placed him under house arrest at Berkeley Castle. Shortly after, an official announcement declared the king had passed away. However, no transparent, public funeral was ever held. The king's corpse was hidden behind shady proclamations from the usurpers. Immediately, rumors exploded across Europe that Edward II had successfully escaped and was living as a hermit, having renounced the material world in Italy. Why did the public so easily buy into this conspiracy theory? Look at how the nobility of that era behaved. To understand the savagery of the times, you only need to look at the death of Hugh Despenser, Edward II's most beloved favorite. When captured by the opposition in 1326, Despenser suffered the most gruesome execution in England. He was hanged until nearly asphyxiated, cut down and dragged across cobblestones, then castrated alive, and had his organs ripped out and tossed into a fire while his eyes were still open and conscious. In a dynasty where nobles were perfectly willing to butcher each other with horrifying torture, royal body swapping, hiding corpses, and/or secret imprisonments were things the public believed with 100% certainty could happen. The peak of this psychological manipulation was the tragic death of the Earl of Kent, Edmund of Woodstock, the king's half-brother. Even though Edward II was reported dead, the deposing faction purposefully laid a trap, spreading fake rumors that the king was secretly imprisoned in the dungeons of Corfe Castle. The naive Earl swallowed the bait, mobilizing a secret strike force to infiltrate the castle and rescue his brother. The result? There was no king there. Immediately, ambushing soldiers captured the Earl of Kent and beheaded him for organizing a rebellion. This bloody event proved that the king is alive rumor was actually an invisible blade wielded by the ruling class to purge the last remaining seeds of opposition. This suspicion was further solidified when the Fieschi letter was discovered. This was a genuine historical document sent by a reputable priest, Manuele Fieschi, directly to King Edward III, asserting that his father was still alive and living as a monk in Italy. In reality, this letter may have simply been an instrument of political blackmail used by the church faction to manipulate the British crown. But it stands as the clearest proof that the king is still alive. Rumor sometimes doesn't stem from the peasantry, but is fabricated by the highest echelons of power to threaten one another. Number 5. Wladyslaw III, the honey-soaked head, and the illusion in Madeira. Fanaticism doesn't just create imposters, it creates a mechanism of continent-wide denial. Let's travel back to 1444, to the infamous Battle of Varna. The 20-year-old king of Poland and Hungary, Wladyslaw III, was leading the Crusader army against the mighty Ottoman Empire. The death of this king carried absolutely none of the heroic undertones that Western historians often painted. It stemmed from treachery and the disastrous consequences of politics, blinded by religion. Previously, Wladyslaw had signed a sworn peace treaty with the Ottoman Sultan Murad II. But just days later, under relentless instigation from the papal legate, who continuously whispered in the king's ear that oaths made to infidels are invalid and need not be kept, Wladyslaw backstabbed the Sultan. He tore up the peace treaty and marched his army straight into the jaws of death. On the Varna battlefield, in a moment of arrogance and impulsivity, the young king led a small cavalry charge directly into the fortified center line held by the elite Ottoman janissaries. The result was a slaughter. Wladyslaw was knocked from his horse. A janissary lunged forward, swinging his blade and cleanly severing the Christian king's head right on the front lines. Wladyslaw's headless corpse never had the chance to return to Europe. The brutal reality was that Sultan Murad II ordered his severed head to be submerged in a large vat of honey to prevent it from rotting. The jar containing the Polish king's head was then taken back to the capital of Edirne and publicly displayed on a pike as a morbid trophy, an ultimate humiliation. How did the West react to this news? They chose to shut their eyes and ignore it. All of Europe refused to believe that the Crusader king, representing God, had been decapitated by an infidel and preserved in honey. They clung to the lack of a body at home to delude themselves. They convinced each other that Wladyslaw had miraculously survived, escaped on a ship, fled to the remote Portuguese island of Madeira, and lived out the rest of his days under the alias Henrique Alemão. This legend of the surviving king was, in truth, not an act of reverence. It was a cowardly painkiller. It was the ruling class and the clergy's way of rejecting a catastrophic reality to cover up the humiliating failure of extreme religious ideology that they themselves had engineered. The astonishing part is that this absurd fable was endorsed by the most powerful figures. According to Franciscan archives, King Afonso V of Portugal actually granted land and titles to this Henrique on Madeira, treating him as royal guest. Even bands of knights and monks from Poland secretly sailed to Madeira just to weep and beg this man to return and reclaim his throne. The fact that heads of state blindly played along with this script proved one thing. Deceit had officially become an ideology. Even when the crown had fallen into the mud, the nobility would rather humor an impostor on a distant island than admit they had sent their true sovereign into a pointless death. Number 6. Constantine XI, the Marble King and the final psychological lifeboat. The final figure on our list didn't die of stupidity or tyranny. His death was epic and tragic, but the legend of his survival was born from the absolute agony of a nation on the brink of annihilation. This was Constantine XI Palaiologos, the final emperor of the Byzantine Empire. In 1453, Constantinople, the greatest city in the world at the time, was besieged by tens of thousands of Ottoman troops under Sultan Mehmed II. In the dying days of the 1,000-year empire, no miracles appeared. Constantine had swallowed his pride, sending envoys to beg for reinforcements from Western Europe in sheer desperation. His city was drowning in plague, famine, and massive piles of uncleared corpses. The proud emperor had to strip the gold and silver from statues and the holiest church domes, melting them down into coins just to pay his mercenaries. On May 29, 1453, the final line of defense shattered. When tens of thousands of enemy soldiers poured through the St. Romanos Gate, Constantine XI did not run. He stripped off his imperial insignia, drew his sword, and plunged straight into the looting hordes, fighting like an unknown soldier until his very last breath. The body of this great emperor was trampled, crushed, and hacked to pieces beneath the feet of thousands of looting soldiers. His corpse was mutilated to the point that, after the battle ended, they could only identify his headless body, stuck in the bloody mud, thanks to his purple boots embroidered with the double-headed eagle, the exclusive emblem of Byzantine royalty. The desperation to confirm his death was so immense that historians on both sides recorded it. According to the Greek historian Ducas, the moment the city fell, Sultan Mehmed II frantically ordered his troops to turn over every pile of corpses, to severing countless mud-caked heads to wash them and see if any belonged to Constantine. He wanted to mount the final emperor's head on a spike to entirely extinguish their will to resist. However, apart from the purple boots, not a single face was verified. The very impotence of the Ottoman army in finding Constantine's head became an explosive catalyst. That very night, as the city collapsed, folk ballads about the sleeping marble king began spreading rapidly among the people, transforming a tragic death into an inextinguishable flame of hope. Faced with the devastating shock of losing their nation, the Greeks broke down completely. The city was overflowing with the dead. The great Hagia Sophia was converted, traumatized by this era erasing destruction, and the populace refused to face the gruesome death of their monarch. From the ashes, a desperate myth sprouted. They whispered that, in the exact moment the enemy's blade was about to fall, an angel descended, turned Constantine XI into a marble statue, and hid him deep beneath the Golden Gate. They believed the marble king was merely sleeping. One day, the angel would return his sword, the statue would come back to life, stand up, and drive the Ottomans out of the city forever. Believing the emperor was still alive wasn't a political manipulation. It was the ultimate psychological defense mechanism. It was the sole lifeboat that helped the Greek community hold on to a fragile sliver of hope, preventing their national spirit from completely snapping amidst the dark reality of their annihilation. History isn't always written by the victors. Sometimes it is rewritten by mob psychology, by desperate people refusing to accept the truth, or by scheming rulers wanting to borrow the corpses of the dead to pave the way for their own ambitions. From heads soaked in honey to rotting flesh in putrid vinegar barrels, these 6 medieval kings proved one thing. No matter how absolute your power is, your flesh will eventually return to dust. But myths and rumors are always the cheapest tools to manipulate a crowd drowning in delusion and panic. When an information void appears, the human brain automatically fills it with the stories they want to believe the most, regardless of how absurd or horrifying they might be. If you are someone who loves uncovering the raw, hidden corners of history, who rejects the rose-tinted glasses to stare straight into the coarse nature of humanity, then don't forget to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel below. Your support is our greatest motivation to keep digging deeper and bringing you the most authentic footage. Leave a comment and let us know. Which king's legend do you think is the most insane and haunting? See you again on our next journeys decoding history. Unfiltered History, signing off, and see you next time.